Hello, Miss Larpenter. Today I'll be doing my five-passage analysis on Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. My mother's voice drones on. She is not talking to me. She is talking to the puke, but she is calling it my name, Claudia. She wipes it up as best as she can and puts a scratchy towel over the large wet place. I lie down again. The rags have fallen from the window crack and the air is cold. I dare not call her back and am reluctant to leave my warmth. My mother's anger humiliates me. Her words chafe my cheeks and I am crying. I do not know that she is angry at me, but at my sickness. I believe she despises my weakness for letting the sickness take hold. By and by I will not get sick. I will refuse to. But for now I am crying. I know I am making more snot, but I can't stop. This passage really speaks to who Claudia is. She's young, naive, and therefore believes that her mother is really angry at her, when in reality she is just angry at the fact she has to clean up the mess Claudia made. Since she is young, she doesn't recognize this. The passage starts with sensory description, which is noise. It then transitions into personification and imagery to really put the reader in Claudia's position. All this imagery really accentuates what happens next, which is emotional description and a metaphor. Morrison is moving the reader out of the basic imagery and into the head of Claudia. The usage of she as a syntax point in this passage further emphasizes how she feels towards her mother and makes her this looming figure throughout the passage. Morrison does an excellent job of really showcasing and showing us that Claudia cares. She wants to persevere, but she's still young and naive and has a lot to learn. This really creates a tone of solitude for the reader, and the reader really feels like Claudia is taking the world on her own. I couldn't join them in their adoration because I hated Shirley. Not because she was cute, but because she danced with Bojangles, who was my friend, my uncle, my daddy, and who ought to have been soft shoeing it and chuckling with me. Instead, he was enjoying, sharing, giving a lovely dance thing with one of those little white girls whose socks never slid down their heels. So I said, I like Jane Withers. They gave me a puzzled look, decided I was incomprehensible, and continued their reminiscing about old squint-eyed Shirley. I also chose this passage as secondary because it too really represents who Claudia is, and Morrison effectively demonstrates that through varied techniques in this passage. It starts off with the emotional description with Claudia and illustrates a symbol who we know to be the embodiment of white beauty, Shirley. Followed after thorough imagery is the symbol for African Americans in Bojangles. It emphasizes this has a lot of meaning to Claudia through the repetition of my following an attachment to Claudia. The diction in this passage used is verbs showcasing how drastically mistreated African Americans are and the passion behind Claudia's disgust towards Shirley. Morrison does an excellent job of further portraying Claudia's independence and creates a tone of resentment in Claudia for people viewing white skin as more beautiful. There was a difference in the reaction of the children to these battles. Sammy cursed for a while, or left the house, or threw himself into the fray. He was known, by time he was 14, to have run away from home no less than 27 times. Once he got to Buffalo and stayed 3 months. His returns, whether by force or circumstance, were sullen. Pecola, on the other hand, restricted by youth and sex, experimented with methods of endurance. Though the methods varied, the pain was as consistent as it was deep. She struggled between an overwhelming desire that one would kill the other and a profound wish that she herself could die. Now she was whispering, "Don't, Miss Breedlove, don't." Bacola, like Sammy and Choli, always called her mother Mrs. Breedlove. This passage works really well to describe Bacola as an example of wishful thinking throughout the novel. We begin with a lot of action diction in Pacola's brother. He was able to go off and do whatever he wants in the world, and leave the house when their parents were fighting, and the diction really speaks to his desire for the ability to do what he wants as a male in this world. We are then met with the juxtaposition that Pacola is unable to do anything among all of this. She's unable to leave the house or do anything compared to her brother who is able to do something about it. She, on the other hand, as a young woman, an African American woman, is unable to change the circumstance of her parents fighting. After this, after we have been introduced to this contrast, we are met with emotional description from Pecola. She wishes and wishes that something would change, and her powerful statements towards death illustrate this. We end with her saying, "Don't, Mrs. Breedlove, don't." This passage by Morrison does an immaculate job giving really good insight into Pecola, but not only towards the feelings not only towards her feelings towards her parents, but African American beauty too. This idea of wishful thinking and the inability to change what she can't control floods over into her standards of beauty and wishfully thinking she could change her appearance based off of white beauty. This creates a tone for the reader that Pecola is more than meets the idea and lets the reader know that she is really struggling. Pretty eyes, pretty blue eyes, big blue pretty eyes, run, Jip run, Jip runs, Alice runs. Alice has blue eyes, Jerry has blue eyes, Jerry runs, Alice runs. They run with their blue eyes, four pretty blue sky eyes, blue like Mrs. Forrest blue blouse eyes, morning glory blue eyes, Alice and Jerry blue storybook eyes. Each night, without fail, she prayed for blue eyes. Fervently for a year she had prayed. Although somehow somewhat discouraged, she was not without hope. To have something as wonderful as that happen would take a long, long time. This first stanza is super powerful, so I illustrated it with syntax, diction, and emotive adjectives, and that runs through the entire stanza. The stanza is there to ingrain into your head this idea of white beauty and blue eyes. The syntax of extremely short sentences, each with a period afterwards, makes you really quickly read the message, but then ponder after each one. The diction adds to really show, the diction acts to really showcase this message revolving the blue eyes, the action diction, and that white beauty is somewhat chaotic to the mind of Piccola. It's all over the place in this repetition of rhyming and continuous action really showcases that towards Piccolo's feelings. Finally, in this stanza, we see extreme emotive adjectives being used. This is to further emphasize the blue eyes part of the message in White Beauty. Continuing on from the stanza is when we see how this message affects Piccola. She fervently prays for blue eyes and thinks that with enough time, it will happen. This really plays into how emotional Piccola is and how her wishful thinking is taking over somewhat of her logistical thinking. Interestingly, we also see the passive and active voice being used. We see each night, without fail, she prayed for blue eyes, and then fervently for a year she had prayed. This is passive to active voice, and I believe it's there to further emphasize this grander idea that if she just does something differently, perhaps Pecola will have different eyes. This passage really showcases the extremities of Morrison's writing, and she does an excellent job using syntax, diction, emotive adjectives, and passive versus active voice to bring out this idea of white beauty and misrepresent what it means to really be beautiful. She uses this weird stanza with syntax, diction, and emotive adjectives that makes the reader feel like Piccola, wishfully thinking that with enough time, blue eyes will magically become ours. Finally, I chose this last passage because I believe it is the most powerful in the entire book. More strongly than my fondness for Piccola, I felt a need for someone to want the black baby to live, just to counteract the universal love of white baby dolls, Shirley Temples, and Marine Peels. And Frida must have felt the same thing. We did not think of the fact that Piccola was not married. Lots of girls had babies who were not married. And we did not dwell on the fact that the baby's father was Piccola's father too. The process of having a baby by any male was incomprehensible to the bluest eye us. At least she knew her father. We thought only of this overwhelming hatred for the unborn baby. We remembered Mrs. Breedlove knocking Piccola down and soothing the pink tears of the frozen doll baby that sounded like the door of our icebox. We remembered the knuckled eyes of the school children under the gaze of meringue pie, and the eyes of these same children when they looked at Piccola. Or maybe we didn't remember. We just knew. We had defended ourselves since memory against everything and everybody, considered all speech a code to be broken by us, and all gestures subject to careful analysis. We had become headstrong, devious, and arrogant. Nobody paid any Nobody paid us any attention, so we paid very good attention to ourselves. Our limitations were not known to us, not then. Our only handicap was our size. People gave us orders because they were bigger and stronger, so it was with this confidence, strengthened by pity and pride, that we decided to change the course of events and alter human life. Describing how Claudia wants Piccolo's baby to thrive as everyone else wants it to die is extremely powerful. We start off with this emotional description that introduces all literary elements for the entire passage. Emotional description, syntax, diction, and symbols. The syntax in this passage is the repetition and usage of plurality. By encompassing we, Morrison makes the reader feel included with the issue of Piccolo's baby, making it feel more real and human. Furthermore, the diction used in this passage is fiery and displays emotions. Words like felt, think, dwell, headstrong, soothing, bigger, and stronger really elevates the importance of this moment. Finally, put all together, Morrison creates an amazing passage that tells the reader that it'll be different. Morrison emphasizes that through and through, they want this baby from Bacola to be different and stand as its symbol of its own towards African Americans of beauty, and no longer rely on the standards of white beauty and blue eyes to encompass what beauty truly represents. It is in a culmination of an entire novel's worth of character development across everyone to present to the reader that you are beautiful and you can accept it. Thank you.